Hello, ladies and gentlemen, it is I, Lunar, and I've got for you all a very special kind of video today, and I know that you're all wondering what this game even is, in spite of the fact that it's not available. This game right here you're seeing is Athena Crisis, and if you don't know what the hell that is, it's a turn-based tactics game akin to the likes of Advanced Wars, XCOM, Fire Emblem, etc., etc., those types of games that probably everyone and their grandmother has played by now. And I found this game about a long while ago, and it actually kind of enticed me because it actually feels a lot more like a small-scale Advance Wars. Or a Tiny Metal, if you'd rather. But in this video for today, I'm going to be showing off to you all of the different unit types in this game and what purpose they are able to serve. I'm definitely going to be using the level editor to demonstrate all of this, so hopefully you'll enjoy what you're seeing here. And just like I said at the start of the video, this game is in an unfinished state at the moment, so do be prepared to experience some bugs and glitches. And of course, if you want access to the early access build of this game as well, the link to their official website is in the description down below. You can actually sign up via email and whatnot, or you can even join their Discord server. Even talk about the game there. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's go! So first of all, we're going to start things off with all the buildings, the usual subjects that you need for a tactics game. First of all, your HQ. Pretty self-explanatory, has very great defense. The most important building of them all. Now, unlike all the other buildings, this building you can only capture and not destroy. Which, I won't lie, that is a little disappointing, but I mean, hey, it's the developer's choice, I guess. But on to the other buildings. The house. Basically, your main means of generating income. Has very low defense, but it has a good cost nonetheless. Only $100 to construct it. And I'll get to how you construct these things later on. Barracks. Pretty self-explanatory. An entire place for all infantry, with the exception of the jetpack. Has moderate defense, but it costs the same as the house. The factory. The place where you build all of your vehicles. And yes, that also includes trains, but you need to put it right next to a railroad in order to build these. Has pretty poor defense, and it costs only $200, which is pretty fair. Airbase. Obviously allows you to spawn aircraft. It can actually be built using a airport construction site. It's got moderate defense, and it costs only $200 to build. And last but not least, for all of your units, a shipyard. Moderate defense, but pretty high cost, $300 to build. And it can only be constructed on a dockyard tile. Yeah, these little things right here. Now to the other buildings. Oil rigs. Basically the same thing as the house, except it can literally generate 2 times the income. Costs at least $200 to build, and it has some moderate defense. The repair shop. Basically here to repair any vehicles that have damage, and they can even be supplied as well. This also goes for amphibious units, as it says here. Can ultimately be constructed on construction tiles, and I'll put this little guy right here. Oh dear, I literally just realized that I'm on the wrong team. Oops. Alright, but let me place it down on the workshop just so you know that it works perfectly. But moving on, however, shelter. This is basically like the repair shop except for infantry. Automatically heals them at the beginning of each turn, has great defense, and costs only $200 to build. They can only be constructed on these campsite tiles. But just to show you just how much perfect they are, the radar station. This thing is only really meant to activate electric gates. So if there's like cloud tiles on the map, then you could basically use your money to spawn it in, and you can place it wherever you like. Assuming that there are cloud tiles in between, but I forgot to put that here. But believe me when I tell you this, That's all this radar station really does. And honestly, that really is pretty disappointing, because I honestly felt like maybe it could serve another purpose, like allowing you to like see better in fog of war, like give you quite a huge range boost and whatnot. I don't know, maybe at least something to make it a little more useful besides opening gates. Probably my least favorite building in this game without question. Research lab. I thought that this building was actually would actually allow you to research more powerful weapons such as the cannon and the super tank, but as you see, it literally just increases all of the strength of your units by 10, which I guess that can be perfectly useful if you have 2 labs that are captured under your army. Got moderate defense, and that's all you need to know about it. And, of course, the construction site. Basically here for you to build any kind of building you want. Which leads me directly to the units. First runner-up here, we got our Pioneer. Very poor defense, moderate movement range, with decent supplies, as well as decent vision, and only costs $100 to spawn. And as you can see down here, its movement is very well versed in trenches, very easy to navigate around construction sites and other tiles, including forests, not so great on rivers, railroads, and mountains, and obviously not able to access water archipelagos and all the like. But that last bit isn't really all that important, because what its main purpose is super helpful. So if you end up finding a construction site, you can put this guy out right over here, for example, and you can basically build whatever you want. Like, say there's a house, barracks, factory, repair shop, and a radio station. But for all intents and purposes, let's go with the house. Of course, you do end up losing him after you build a building, but he does actually serve a good purpose nonetheless. Infantry. Pretty self-explanatory. It's your basic rifleman. Not so great defense. Not so great movement range. Has 50 supplies, which is fine. And his vision is ultimately not that great. More or less the same as the Pioneer. Though, he does actually cost less, so that's pretty much all you really need for a good infantry unit. Only $150. So, as you can see down here, for its stats, it's weak against an APU, an artillery, and a patrol boat. These are just examples on the types of units it struggles against. But the types of units it's actually pretty good against are Pioneers. I mean, obviously, they can't defend themselves, so how could they? And they can deal devastating damage to jetpacks and seaplanes. And as far as its movement is concerned, it's more or less the same as the Pioneer. Blech. Yeah, a lot of damage there. Now on to the medic. Has very poor defense and very poor vision, but his movement range is actually pretty good. He has a lot of supplies, and he costs $225. Now, obviously, because he's not meant to be a fighter whatsoever, he's pretty much weak against just about every unit on the field. Maybe not the Pioneer so much, but then again, that's only because they can't fight back. But yeah, like I just said, the medic can actually attack, he's just not that powerful. But that doesn't really matter much, because his main purpose is to simply heal other units. And I can't demonstrate that for some reason. I don't know why. But yeah, it's a medic. I don't really think you need to know much more about it. Off to the rocket launcher. Moderate defense, moderate movement range, moderate supplies, moderate vision, and only costs $250 to build. Not very effective against infantry and Pioneers particularly. Does slight marginal damage to a jetpack. Is super strong against a seaplane and a supply train. Again, these are just examples on the types of units it's effective against. And it's super devastating against an APU, artillery, and a patrol boat. But to show you that it's super effective against the tank as well. Boom. See, only did 3 damage to me. That's pretty impressive. Now, the Saboteur is actually pretty cool. He's not really meant to be a fighter, more so rather be a Saboteur, as the name describes. And what he basically does is, not only are you able to, like, attack other units, not that you should use him for that, you can also strip other enemy units of their supplies and gas. Okay, what the heck? Yep, just like that. Reduced his supplies to 20. And I even stripped half of his ammo too, which is pretty cool. So yeah, you can literally do this for pretty much every vehicle there is. And the same thing also goes for infantry as well. I don't think you can do this with aircraft, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, there you go. That's its primary purpose. Perfectly serviceable just for that, and that's pretty much all you really need from a Saboteur. Very great if you're really in a pinch and you're trying to stop the enemy from getting to an objective. Has a pretty poor defense. Has limited supplies. Pretty minimal supplies. Very poor vision. Costs $325 to spawn. But he actually does have some good movement range, which honestly is perfectly fitting for a Saboteur. Now for the Sniper. Moderate defense. Good movement range. Minimal supplies. Though, it's pretty much plenty. But, she does have very poor vision, and she costs $350. And her attack range, unlike other units, can actually be pretty useful. Only 2 to 4 attack range, which in itself is not bad for a sniper. Now, obviously, it's pretty weak against certain vehicles, like the train, tanks, APUs, Seacraft, etc., etc. But what it's super effective against, however, for some strange reason, is artillery, and obviously, it's super devastating against infantry unit. I mean, this unit can literally kill units in one shot, just like that. Bam, baby. Yep. The sniper really is that powerful. Now onto the jetpack. Very poor defense, good movement range, minimal supplies. Vision is definitely not that great either, and it only costs $350. About the same as the tank. Oh yeah, and I also did forget to mention, some of these units actually have two different types of weapons. So in this unit's particular case, not only does he have a machine gun, he's also got an air-to-air missile, which isn't really that useful, except against some aircraft, as listed below. But, just to show you, obviously he's not very effective against heavy armor, APUs, Seacraft, but he's definitely very useful against infantry, as well as other jetpack units, and seaplanes. In which he can also use his air-to-air missiles against the jetpack, the seaplane, and the X-Fighter. More on that later. Now let's demonstrate. Yeah, rockets actually kind of powerful against a jetpack. Pretty cool, isn't it? And for the last infantry unit, we've got the Flamethrower. Has very, very poor defense, as in absolutely none at all. Doesn't have great movement range, minimal supplies, and costs $400 to spawn, but her vision is actually great. Only 3 vision in Fog of War. This unit did actually get a nerf in this latest patch, just not too long ago. So she's not nearly as powerful against vehicles as she used to be, but I really think that balance really did make a bit of sense to me, considering that I feel like it's more suitable for anti-infantry as an anti-infantry unit than anything else. So, yeah, obviously deals heavy damage against infantry and jetpacks for some reason. Of course, you could try to use this thing on vehicles if you wanted to, but like I said, it did get a slight nerf. As much as I understand why it makes sense, it's also kind of unfortunate. But hey, at least she's super powerful, so there's that. And that's all the infantry you need to know about. Well, the jetpack doesn't necessarily count as infantry. I just decided to put it up here with this group because it more or less kinda is like infantry. So I don't really know why it's actually spawnable in the airbase, but whatever. Developers' decisions, I guess. But here we go, guys. We're moving on to the vehicles, and boy oh boy, there is a lot of them. First of all, the APU. Super effective against infantry, as you can see. Not so much against tanks, or other heavy armor for that matter. It can also deal some great damage against seaplanes, in particular, or probably aircraft. And its movement is actually pretty applicable for just about every terrain type, save for the seas, save for the ocean stuff. I mean, obviously it's an APU, how else can it be? So yeah, nothing at all like the infantry units. Has great movement on just about all terrain tiles, construction sites, roads, railroads, mountains, you name it. Alright, next up, the Jeep. Not so great defense, great movement range, which obviously makes sense, it's a Jeep after all. Lots of supplies, great vision, and only costs $150 to spawn. Has very easy movement amongst most of the conventional tiles, construction sites, roads, etc., etc. Not so great on forests and railroads, and definitely not able to access mountains, trenches, and rivers. However, there is a very good reason for that, and it's that you really need this thing to carry some units. So if you really need to get someplace as efficiently as possible, this thing will actually make a perfect suitable alternative to the transport copter, and I'll talk about that when I get to it. But yeah, as you could probably imagine, it's useful in serving its purpose, which in my books is always a good thing. Off to the Humvee. Moderate defense, great movement range, somehow better than the Jeep, but hey, it's good range nonetheless. A decent number of supplies, great vision, basically a scout from Advance Wars, and it costs $225 to spawn. Obviously, it is pretty weak against artillery, as far as the machine gun is concerned, but it does slight damage to a seaplane, and definitely super effective against infantry. However, like some units, it also has another weapon, in this case the anti-artillery gun, where it can deal insane damage, as you can see here. Yeah, pretty insane, I know. And just like with the Jeep, it's got the same kind of movement. It's got the same kind of movement. Moves around pretty easily on ground tiles. Has a pretty hard time with forests and railroads, and yeah, you pretty much get the idea. And just to show you how powerful this thing really is. And now this will be a good time for me to show off the purpose of the Jeep. Okay, I didn't want to do that. Alright. So there you have it. You can use this thing not only to carry other units, but you can also supply other units as well. On to the good stuff now. Artillery. Has pretty minimal defense, good movement range, a decent amount of supplies, good vision, has an attack range of 2 to 4, so pretty much identical to the sniper, and it costs $250 to build. It can deal some moderate damage to certain seacraft, but it's super strong against a seaplane, for some reason. I mean, it is an aircraft, so I expected it to be more so for ground targets, but I digress. But obviously, as you can imagine, it's super devastating against hostile armor as well as infantry. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you right now by attacking this tank. Kaboom! Yep. Just like that. Now, onto the cannon. Very poor movement range, very poor vision, but where it lacks in those areas, it makes up for it with its supplies, as well as its defense, as well as its attack range. And let me tell you, this unit is pretty freaking insane. Yup, it's an artillery. On steroids. An artillery on steroids. Anti-air. Pretty self-explanatory. It's mainly used for anti-air defense. It can also be used against infantry as well, but it's not nearly as effective against that as this. But it has minimal defense, has minimal supplies. It costs $250 to build, but it has some great vision as well as impressive movement range for a tank on treads. Perfect. Yep. Obviously, it is super effective against an X-Jet because they're like the weakest aircraft in the game. But that pretty much does it for you guys. That's the anti-air. And what's a turn-based tactics game without your average everyday unit? The tank. Obviously needs to have great defense, so it's super beefy. Got good movement range, just like the Jeep. Has minimal supplies, unfortunately. Pretty poor vision, and costs $350 to construct. Obviously, it's weak against Seacraft, and does marginal damage against infantry units. But what it's super effective against, however, is against hostile trains, as well as other hostile armor. And yes, that includes the Sea Patrol. And just to show you that this thing is as powerful as it comes, bam! Yep. Now it's been reduced to 43% health. Not bad for a tank. Alright, sorry about that, guys. Anyways, on to our next unit. The Heavy Artillery. Just a more powerful version of the artillery. Yeah, never mind I said that the cannon was the artillery on steroids. This is the artillery on steroids. So, it's got pretty poor defense all around. Has pretty poor movement range. Very minimal supplies, so it's very undesirable. I guess to keep the thing from being as overpowered as possible. Doesn't have great vision range, and only costs $500 to build, which, fair enough. It's a rocket unit. Definitely gotta be pretty expensive to carry all those missiles. And not to mention, this thing has an attack range of 3 to 5 tiles. So that can actually be very helpful if you have it stuck between a trench and whatnot. Obviously, this thing is not very... Or actually, I should say that this thing is obviously very effective against just about everything, really, with the exception of aircraft. Can deal damage to just about everything, including infantry, tanks, amphibious tanks, and it can also be utilized against seacraft, just like I mentioned. And just to demonstrate to you how powerful this thing really is, yeah, I don't really have any other units to demonstrate this on. Can deal at least 117 damage, which is pretty impressive. Yeah, just like that. So yeah, it's an artillery. What more can I say? And finally, for our second to last unit, we've got the heavy tank. Got super beefy defense, as you can see. Has good movement range. Minimal supplies. Doesn't have great vision and costs $550 to spawn. And obviously it has two types of weapons. The heavy gun, which deals damage against infantry, and can deal some devastating blows to other hostile armor. And for the machine gun, vice versa applies. So yeah, it's basically just a heavier version of the tank. And just to show you that it really is as powerful as it comes. Yep. Did a lot of damage to this little guy and absolutely no damage on me. And now off to the super tank. And let me tell you, man, this thing is pretty insane. 70 defense, probably making this the most well-defended assault craft for your ground of all ground units. But it comes at the cost of poor movement range, minimal supplies, and definitely has some very poor vision. Its only real weapon is the heavy gun, which obviously it's meant to be effective against certain armor, especially seacraft. And just to demonstrate its power to you, BAM! Yep. Just like that. And look at that, we're finally on the trains. First of all, the supply train. You've pretty much seen the Jeep, so this thing more or less serves the same purpose. Yep, just like that, refilled my ammo and gas. Oh yeah, I forgot to show off the stats. Sorry. Has good defense, great movement range, has a lot of supplies, not so great vision, and only costs $150 to spawn. Just like I said, it can only be spawned if there's a factory right next to a railroad. And obviously, as you can see, it's only able to move on railroads. The transport train has good defense, good movement range, but where it lacks is supplies, vision, and costs $300. And as the description says, it can transport up to 4 different types of infantry, air infantry, vehicle, artillery, or amphibious vehicles. So say I want to put this little guy in here, I can do just that. Yep. That's more or less exactly what the transport train is, except it doesn't actually supply other units. But of course, I saved the best for last. The Mammoth, or aka the artillery train. This thing is insanely expensive of all the trains, costing at least $800 to spawn, has very poor vision and minimal supplies, but where it makes up for all of that is with its beefy defense, not nearly as defensive as the super tank, but it does have some decent movement range, and on top of that, it's got 2 to 4 attack range. And just to show you how insane this thing is, yeah, look at that. 118 damage on just this one tank. And that's just a tank. So yeah, it's basically just like the heavy artillery, where you don't need to lock it down in order to be able to use it the next turn. So there you have it. That's pretty much all of the land units that exist on the game. Which now brings us to the aircraft. First up, our seaplane. Has good defense, decent movement range, lacks in supplies, has great vision, and costs only $150 to spawn. Now obviously this thing is pretty weak against all seacraft, but it can be pretty effective against hostile armor, but it's super powerful against infantry as well. Which, admittedly, is its primary purpose. And just to show you that, yeah, obviously it's not a one-hit kill, but it does decent damage nonetheless, which is something I really like about this plane. Up next, the transport copter, or transport chopper. Actually, I forgot to show off the movement range of the seaplane. So, as you can see, it can move pretty easily around all these tiles, but has a bit of a hard time with mountains and definitely can't access deep waters whatsoever. And the same thing more or less applies to the transport copter, which, speaking of, good defense, impressive movement range, lots of supplies, great vision, and costs only $200 to spawn. And as you can see, just like with the Jeep and transport train, it can carry at least 2 units, which admittedly is a little disappointing in my opinion, because I expected this thing to be able to carry at least 4 infantry units. Though maybe that's for balancing purposes, and maybe it would have been a little broken if you could transport 4 units, but I don't know. I feel like maybe that's a buff it could use. But yeah, it serves its purpose, and it serves it well. On to the Assault Copter. Has great defense, great movement range, and it has some great vision as well. But where it really lacks, however, is with the supply count, and it only costs $275. And just like with the other aircraft, it's strong against infantry, and it can be devastating against hostile armor. Oh yeah, and this is something I did actually forget to show off, but the transport copter can actually supply other air units as well, so if you need to give them extra ammo or extra fuel, then you can place the transport copter right next to them, and presto. So yeah, basically the same thing as the supply train and the supply jeep. Alright then, off to the X-Fighter. Surprisingly good defense for a pretty cheap jet. Has good movement range. Has minimal supplies. Not so great vision. It's got an attack range of 1 to 2 tiles. And it only costs $250 to spawn. Obviously, it's super strong against other X-Fighters, and definitely super devastating against infantry, or jetpacks, and seaplanes. Perfect. Yeah, just a diet fighter jet. Which, speaking of which, the fighter jet definitely has some pretty beefy defense for a fighter jet. But it's got a pretty impressive movement range, as well as good vision, has moderately high supplies, and costs $500 to spawn. I mean, hey, that makes a lot of sense considering that, you know, it literally is a pretty powerful craft on its own. And as you can see here, it deals great damage to seaplanes, X-Fighters, even other jets as well, transport copters, and it's also super effective against jetpacks. And unlike some of the other aircraft we've seen, it has very good movement range on just about every terrain tile, including water, which is super helpful. And just to show you how powerful this thing is, 91 damage against a helicopter. Pretty impressive stuff. And finally, we have the Bomber, easily the beefiest of all the aircraft we have here, with 70 defense, 5 movement range, moderately decent supplies, not so great vision, but it costs $700. I mean, why the hell wouldn't it? And obviously, it is super devastating against just about every craft, with the exception of aircraft. Although for some reason, I have seen that it can actually attack seaplanes. But don't quote me on that though. I don't remember for sure. But yeah, here you go. Just to demonstrate how powerful this thing is. Yep. I tell you, man, this thing fucks. And finally, we have the Seacraft. Because, oh boy, there's quite a bit of it. And some of this stuff is actually pretty crazy. First of all, we got ourselves the patrol ship. Moderate defense, good movement range, minimal supplies, or moderately high supplies, great vision, and only costs $300 to spawn. And though it is extremely weak against heavy armor and other seacraft, well, obviously its primary purpose is to scout out other areas in fog of war, it's super devastating against infantry and jetpacks. And I'm going to show you the really cool thing about this thing right now. Yep. The patrol boat itself is actually amphibious. But that's not the only amphibious vehicle we've got here, but don't worry, I'll get to that in a moment. But just to show you how powerful it is against another patrol boat, for example. Oh wow, surprisingly strong against a torpedo boat. Not so much against a destroyer. Speaking of amphibious though, we've got the amphibious tank. Great defense, great movement range, but where it lacks, however, is with supplies, vision, and costs $400. Obviously, it's not very effective against infantry and aircraft, but it is pretty powerful against other seacraft as well as other heavy armor, especially APUs and artillery. It has a very easy time moving around roads, water, and beaches, has a bit of a tough time moving around every other ground tile, and definitely can't access mountains, deep water, or trenches. But just to show you how powerful this thing is, kaboom! Yeah, cute little torpedo boat. And of course, seeing as this is an amphibious vehicle, we can go on land and attack other units like that. Up next, just like I demonstrated before, the torpedo boat. No defense at all. So, obviously, it's a pretty undesirable unit, especially if you're in a tight situation. I don't know if it's me, though, but is that actually a sail on this thing? Or am I eyes just playing tricks? Oh well. But anyways, has great movement range, but where it lacks, however, is both supplies and vision, and costs $200 to spawn. Now, given that this thing is meant to be a torpedo ship, it is super powerful against some seacraft, especially battleships. Definitely not a one-hit kill for sure, but man, that damage. Yeah, better watch out for that. Next up, the hovercraft. Has moderately high defense, great movement range, lots of supplies, good vision, and costs only $400 to spawn. And as the description says, it carries up to 4 different types of units, be it infantry, air infantry, vehicle, or artillery. Has very easy movement on water, beaches, and bridges. Has a tough time with archipelagos and reefs, and definitely can't access land tiles. So it's more or less just like the torpedo boat. And yes, just like I mentioned before, this thing can carry multiple different units of any type, particularly ground units. So yeah, ever need to get your supplies someplace else? You can do it just like that. The lander. This thing is more or less the same thing as the hovercraft, only it can carry just infantry. But it's got moderately low defense, has great movement range, lots of supplies, but where it lacks, however, is vision, and it costs $225 to spawn. So definitely less expensive than the hovercraft for sure. That is, if you're really in need to transport units to another destination or whatnot. And of course, we have the support ship. Basically the same thing as the transport copter, the jeep, and the supply train. It goes around supplying other units when they need the fuel or the ammo. But for a supply ship, it's got great defense, great movement range, and lots of supplies. I mean, hey, you gotta make sure that you can compensate, am I right? But of course, it does lack in vision and costs $250 to spawn. And of course, as you can see, obviously it's going to supply units just like that. Alright, we're just about getting to the home stretch here, folks. Here we have the destroyer. Not so great defense, even for a destroyer, but it has great movement range and also great vision. Has lots of supplies and costs $350 to spawn. This thing is pretty strong against just about all seacraft, and can deal some devastating blows to infantry, other kinds of ground armor, etc., etc. And just to prove to you, just so, I'm going to try it on this warship here. But here you go. The second to last ship of our run here, the cruiser. Has great defense, great movement range, great vision, moderately high supplies, and costs $300 to spawn. And because it has 2 different weapons, with the SAM turret, it can deal devastating blows to jetpacks, the seaplane, and X-Jet, for example. Although, it is super effective against just about all aircraft, so watch out for that. And as for the light gun, it can deal damage to infantry and other ships, just, you know, not very much. But it can ultimately do deal quite a lot of havoc with heavy armor. So do watch out for that. And just to show you just how powerful this thing is against aircraft, yeah, definitely not the greatest against infantry, but it deals quite a decent amount of damage. Although I feel like maybe it could... Yeah, you know what? I think I'm going to give them too many funny ideas. No, I'm going to stop myself. But here we go. I saved the best for last. The battleship. Basically a full-on long-range unit that is super devastating. With 30 defense, which is actually which admittedly is not so great for a battleship. But it has decent movement range, decent amount of supplies, decent vision, and costs $700 to spawn, which admittedly is just as expensive as the bomber for some reason. However, its attack range differs from just about every other unit, being that it acts at least 3 to 6 tiles. And this thing can really damage can deal a great amount of damage to just about everything. Ship, boats, trains, heavy armor, infantry, what have you. Obviously, this isn't meant to be to excel against aircraft, so how can it? And just to show you how insane this thing is, look at that. 83 damage against the destroyer. And of course, it could deal at least 59 damage to another battleship. Yep. Yes, sir. Ah, look at that. Not only has the infantry healed at the campsite, the Humvee has also been repaired at the repair shop. And just to demonstrate the helicopter's resupply ability, there you go. Just like that. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our unit showcase for Athena Crisis. And man, I really am impressed by the amount of units we have in this game. And of course, they did actually plan on adding some new units in future updates. So I'm gonna cross my fingers and hope for the best on that. So like I said, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to try this game out for yourself, it's currently in an unfinished state, so yeah, whatever issues you do find, you can join the Discord server and report any of them to that as well. And of course, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the early access build for this game. I am actually going to make a separate video showing off probably my favorite thing about this game. That, of course, being none other than the level editor itself, which is literally what I use to make this all possible. So, a huge shout out to Nezukawa Tech for really upholding the development of this game. I really hope it actually gets better over time. And as far as criticisms are concerned, I don't really think I have very much to complain about, honestly. Matter of fact, I think it's pretty much everything as I expected it to be. So there you have it, folks. That's your unit showcase for Athena Crisis. And yeah, there's a lot to digest here. So sorry if I was going a little too fast for you, by the way. But with all that being said and done, ladies and gentlemen, go down to the official website if you want an invite to the early access build for this game. The link is in the description down below. And I bid you all adieu, farewell, have yourselves a lovely evening, and until next time, this is Lunar signing out. Catch you around, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks for watching.